Yo, welcome back to another episode of my Little Pinay Nurse podcast. So this is episode 2 and the title is UK Nursing 101 for Filipinos. So basically I will talk about what to expect during your first day, first month, 6 months, and 1 year. And this is specifically as my experience as a ward nurse, and it could be applicable to everyone who are starting as like ward nurses in the UK. On your first day, what you have to expect is it's just a basic like orientation, parang ipapakilala ka lang sa area kung nasaan yung medication room, nasaan yung sluice, nasaan yung toilet, so like everywhere, and then ipapakilala ka sa mga katrabaho mo. And it's always good to take note of the names, the people that you will be working with in your area, and your manager. Usually mga accommodating naman yung mga tao dito. Just make sure that you smile. Kasi we're not used to smiling in the Philippines, especially pag hindi natin kilala. But here, like, you need to. Not really you need to, but it's always advisable to smile to everyone kahit hindi mo kilala. Because parang pangit yung impression sa'yo if you don't do that. I mean, in the Philippines, we do like good morning, especially sa mga senior natin. Pero dito, it's like you do it to everyone, hindi lang sa senior staff or sa manager mo or alam mo yun, okay? At saka, you need to know what number to call in case like you're running late or in case magkakasakit ka, at least you have the number to call and it's not really a good excuse na to say na, oh, I don't know the number to call just because you're new. So, on your first day, you have to take note of that. Usually, it's on the email anyway, but if you don't have it, just make sure that you get all those details on your first day. And if ever you're not feeling well, don't be a hero. Don't be like, oh, I need to work because it's understaffed. Call them ahead of time as soon as possible. Just tell them that I'm not feeling well. I can't come to work tomorrow. The more that you do it, the more that they can find a replacement for you during the day. Mas worse kasi if ever like pinilit mo pa yung sarili mong magtrabaho kahit you're feeling sick and then you have to go home in the middle of the day kasi nga it got worse. So, mas malaki yung problema and they wouldn't appreciate that. Although in the Philippines, we're like heroes. We still try to go to work kahit masakit na tayo kasi we feel bad for other people. But here, parang baliktad. So, you have to take note of that and change your mindset kasi iba nga yung culture dito, iba yung values and norms. It's also your responsibility to answer the phone kasi sa ward ang daming tumatawag and it's not because like you're new, you can't answer the phone or you're scared of answering the phone. No, you can't because it's all everyone's responsibility to answer the phone. And you can always say, sorry, I'm new here. I'm just gonna give the phone to the manager or to the nurse in charge. You can always say that. So don't be scared of answering the calls. You will be tagged as lazy, although you don't want to be lazy, pero matatawag kang lazy if you don't answer the phones. Kasi they don't know that it's scary for us to answer the phones. Actually, during my first day, of course, I was scared of answering the phone because I don't know, especially like the accent. Sometimes we can't really understand, especially if we're not used to it. So, you can always prepare some words to tell them. If you don't understand, then you can always say, I'm sorry, I'm new here. I'm gonna give the phone to the nurse in charge. When you're answering the phone, you have to just tell the department, for example, I don't know, I'm in recovery, so I'll say, hello, recovery. The perfect sentence would be, hello, recovery, staff nurse speaking, how may I help? So, it's something like that. But if you can always shorten it. Like, it doesn't matter. There are just other people who are very, like, specific. But, I mean, that's not really a big issue. And also, if you don't know anything, especially on your first day, just ask questions. Speak up. Iba kasi talaga yung culture sa atin. Like, we were raised to shut up. Like, our parents or other elder people around us would always see us as inferior na, okay, bata ka lang, do not talk back. You're not allowed to talk back. You're not allowed to speak up because bata ka lang. Parang ganon yung upbringing sa atin. Yun yung parang programming sa natin. So, we are bringing it and still having it in our adult life. But that one needs to change here when you arrived in the UK. Kasi dito, you are allowed to speak up. but you can speak up not in a rude way. And then for your first to second month, you'll be preparing for the OSCE, and probably you're gonna take the OSCE exam as well within that time frame. It depends with your trust if what's their style. If they will ask you to focus on OSCE first. So there are other trusts where parang nakafocus ka muna sa OSCE mo, hindi ka muna mag-work, and then once you get the pin, then you immediately start working in the hospital. Pero yung sa akin nga is, I started as healthcare assistant. So, once a week, nagtatrabaho ako sa hospital as healthcare assistant. And the other days during that week, we're using it to have our training. So, we usually, like it's a classroom kind of session. I think it was like 3 days in a week that we have to meet with our instructors, and we just learn everything about OSCE. From 5 years ago, a lot has changed with the OSCE test. So if you're still in the Philippines, I suggest don't prepare for the OSCE yet. You prepare for it when it's like you're nearly coming here. It's better to learn new things than to unlearn and then learn again. And then when you have your nursing pin, you will need to be handling like 6 patients. With my busy ward when I first started, I had like normally 6 to 7 patients. No, 7 patients usually. And then 1 healthcare assistant is like your partner. But that was really a busy ward. It's different in the Philippines because dito, you have to do everything. Like there, all the nurses and the healthcare assistants who will wash the patient, give them food, assist them with eating if they can't eat on their own. A lot. Like relatives wouldn't do anything. Some family, some culture, even though like it's just water, they would still ask for the nurse to pour the water into the cup. Kahit it's very simple like that. Hindi sila magbibigay ng water sa pasyente. I don't know. It's probably their culture, or maybe they have their own reasons. But I've seen that with a lot of people like this. It's not a British culture, by the way. It's something else. But anyway. And then, you can't really give medications right away. You need to be assessed for it. Oral medications is just easy to be assessed by someone senior or your manager. But you will need to go for training for the IV medications administration. So, sometimes when you start, you can't really give IV meds right away. Maybe in the next 3 months. It depends how your manager manages your area. Kung mabilis naman yung manager mo, if she's efficient, then pwede kang ma-train right away with IV meds. And sometimes, it's just a hassle when you are not yet trained. Kasi you need to ask from your other colleagues na they have their own patients. Tapos madedelay kasi, they need to prioritize their own patients. And you are like last on the priority and hindi mabibigay right away. Parang ganon. So, I prefer to be trained right away, to be able to give my IV medications right away, kaysa naman na mag-depend pa ako sa iba. A lot of things, we need training. Like PCA or yung mga paggamit ng ibang machine. Pero merong mga ibang machine like, ECG or mga ganon na you just get the training from a colleague, and it's like an informal kind of training where you just see someone doing it, and then once you are actually confident of doing it, then you can do it on your own. There's just one rule about that. So if you're not confident, if you're not used to it, you can always say no. You can always say that, sorry, I haven't done this for a long time. I'm not confident enough, so can you show me how to do it? Or mga ganon. It's like, it's a way of speaking up, but it's a good way. It's a better way of doing it. Na you're just not saying no, but you have your reason. Diba? And sometimes, kasi we have this siguro mindset that we still try to do it kahit naman hindi natin alam how to do it. Siguro other people would do that. Kasi nga they're scared of saying no. We can always say no, and we can always say a reason. As long as it's a valid reason, then that's not a problem. Also, what I would suggest, especially when you're starting, is learning how to prioritize your tasks. So, in a day's work, sometimes may mga pasyente na tatawag sa'yo because they have their own needs. But sometimes these needs are not urgent. For example, tea. Parang yung pasyente mag-a-ask siya ng tea or can I have tea? But if you have other things to do like giving medications or other important stuff, you can always tell the patient na, oh, okay, I'll do that later, or just give me some time. I'm just giving medications, or I'm just doing this, or I'll find someone to do the tea for you. Sorry, I'm just doing this. So you can always say that. Kasi in my experience, when I was starting, like everything, I would try to accommodate. So, nadidelay yung mga important task ko, like medications and all that. Kasi parang, I don't know with your upbringing, but in my Asian upbringing, I became like a people pleaser na parang I just couldn't say no, would always say yes. And the ending is, hindi ko na natatapos yung trabaho ko. I always extend my shift like 1 hour after or 2 hours after, dun na ako nakakauwi kasi I do my notes and documentation like after the shift. And kasi ang dami kasi din mga monitoring, mga kailangan mag-notes, mag-document. It's very important because if you don't document, it's just considered as not done. So for example, something happened with that patient, incident report has been submitted, and you didn't document, then that's as good as you didn't do anything. And also one thing, you have to practice delegating. Again, in the Philippines, sometimes we take all the burden to ourselves. We don't want to bother other people. It's just our like programming. But here, you can always delegate. You have your healthcare assistant, and sometimes yung mga healthcare assistant, they would feel like you are bossy or you are very demanding kasi you're asking them to do this and that. But there are things that you can say that is a bit less demanding. So, for example, you can always say na, do you mind giving this patient tea? So, when you say, do you mind, it's like a better, way better alternative than saying, can you do this? Because if you say, do you mind, it's like you're giving them an option if it's okay for them or not, right? So, or other people would say, are you happy to do this? Are you happy to do that? Instead of saying, can you please do this? You know how it's the same message, but the other one is just less harsh. Personally as well, before I couldn't delegate. It's just I feel bad of demanding other people to do these things for me. But I'm busy myself. Like, I'm not lazy. I know I'm not lazy. I do things for my patients. I have other things, important things to do. So I'm guilty as well of not delegating properly. But here, practice delegation as much as you can. But don't delegate if you're not doing anything. Because that's like, why don't you just do it yourself? Something like that. Also, always try to speak up. For example, they will ask, oh, are you happy to do this? You can always say, sorry, no, I'm already swamped. I already have a lot of things to do. I still have this and that and blah, blah, blah. So, don't be the passive-aggressive person that we are usually are. I mean, speaking up not in a rude manner, but more in a logical side of things, not being too emotional, but having a backbone. I've heard this a lot of times. I was dating a British guy before. I was telling him about my problems with my manager at that time. That was like 4 years ago. And he said, oh, you need to have a backbone. And I've heard this with someone else as well, but talking about another Filipino nurse. Probably a lot of us doesn't have a backbone. So we need to program ourselves to be more assertive so that we're not like the passive-aggressive kind of people. We have to avoid that. There's a book called Not Nice, and it's a good book that I've read, being like more assertive, being more genuine, speaking up, saying no, learning how to say no. That's actually a skill. Yeah, you can buy that book. It's a good book. And then for your first 6 months, usually they have a program in some trust or hospitals here. They have this program called preceptorship. Preceptorship is like you will be having some trainings or like classroom sessions where they will teach you how to do this, how to do that. It's actually good because you will learn a lot of things that was not like really covered in the OSCE test or other things, but it's like more on building some nursing skills. Last time, during my first year in the UK, I wasn't able to do this preceptorship training because my manager was not very supportive and I was not as well very compliant. I was like parang pabaya, parang pinapabayaan ko lang, parang I just let it happen. And that was my fault as well, na parang hindi ako naging assertive of telling my manager na kailangan kong i-study day itong day na ito kasi meron akong preceptorship session or all that. So hindi ko ginawa yon, and that's not my manager's fault. Although she was not very supportive as well. Pero may kasalanan din ako. So, I wasn't able to really complete the preceptorship program. Pero okay lang kasi I learned a lot of things naman din just working in the ward. Yung ward ko kasi sobrang busy, so I gained a lot of experience, a lot of trainings, a lot of things there na made me a better nurse. And then your first 6 months, it's also good to prioritize complying with your mandatory training, especially blood transfusion. You need to be signed off. So, merong training for that, and merong assessment. So, i-assess ka ng senior staff nurse sa ward mo while you're doing the administration. Pabaya din talaga ako sa mga mandatory trainings ko. I think pabaya ako sa lahat ng a lot of things. I am pabaya. So, I would suggest for you to be not pabaya and just comply with it. Make sure that you are doing it yourself. Don't wait for your manager to tell you to say na, you have to do this and do that. I mean, she will tell you those things at some point na kung ano yung mga trainings na kailangan mo. But don't wait for other people to tell you na, kailangan mo bang gawin to? Or to ask you. For example, merong nagba-blood transfusion. Or even like starting the day, you can just tell the nurse in charge na, kailangan ko ng experience or assessment for blood transfusion. So, whoever gets like a blood transfusion for their patients, can you please let me know so that I can be assessed, and then I can give, and then I'll be assessed and all that. Or kung wala pang training na nabook for you for blood administration, you can always ask your manager. You have to be on it. You have to not rely with other people for you to do that. Yun yung kasalanan ko din before. Like, hindi ako nagko-comply kasi parang hinihintay ko lang na sabihin nila sa akin, gawin mo to, gawin mo yan. Pero, iba kasi dito, parang ikaw kailangan yung mag-effort na gawin yun. Kasi it's for your own good. It's for your own training din naman. I didn't really have an intense experience as a nurse in the Philippines. So, pagpunta ko dito, para akong na culture shock. Like, I don't know anything. Pero, yung ginagawa ko is, if I don't know anything, I would always write it on my notebook, and then I will search it. Like, if I go home, I would look it up online. Just be aware of what it is, especially medications. Like, you can always have access to computers or your phone, and you can just quickly see what this medication does. Binibigay mo na yung drug, and then they would ask you, what is this for? And then you're like, I actually don't know. That's actually a good question. And that's when you check. But it's good to check it beforehand. Be curious, like, what is this? Like, if you don't know anything, don't do it. If you don't know this medication, don't give it. The only way is for you to know a little bit of that medication, and then you can give. And then after a year, you're usually more confident na in your area. You know a lot of things. You will be taking charge as well. You don't have any option for that because you will have to. It's like part of the training. It's part of your nursing role to be nurse in charge at some point. So you will be trained within 1 year. And you can't say no to that because that's part of your job description. Also, you will be working with students, so you have to know that iba yung dito ng students kaysa sa Pilipinas. So in the Philippines, we are usually more what we call tough love. So parang medyo harsh tayo, or we're like a lot more challenging to the student nurses. Kasi we could like take it like that, but here it's more like sensitive. You have to be more, ano bang tawag doon? Like, you have to be less harsh, especially sa mga student, kasi they're just learning, and you can't really say na, you don't know how to do this. You can't do that, kasi they're students, they're just learning, and you will have this training as well of handling students. In our trust, it is a mandatory training. I think a lot of us Filipinos, sometimes we just forget about how different the culture is, and then we usually sometimes nagiging harsh tayo eh. We have that tendency without even noticing it or without even intentionally wanting to do it, pero yung nagiging effect is something like that. So parang syempre the students feel bad and they would cry and all that sometimes. So we have to be careful and we have to adapt to the culture and make sure that we are practicing what is the normal in this country. Like for example, ako, if I have a student, I mean, sometimes I could be really harsh, pero I'm trying to not be harsh. Pero sinasabi ko sa kanila, okay, I'm gonna ask you some questions, but I don't expect you to know the answers right away or all of the questions. It's just like a way of being able to retain information, because sometimes when it's like somebody is asking you, it's like a challenge, and then your brain tends to work a little bit more than just giving the information to you right away. So parang ganun lang, nag-explain kasi ako, nag-explain lang kung ano ba yung intention ko for doing this. Kasi if you don't explain it, parang baka they would take it in the wrong way na parang she's very judgmental, na parang condescending, ganon. We are trying to not be condescending. And so after a year, you could also like think of moving to another area. If you want, you can always easily get interviews from another department in the same hospital if you're not happy with your area. Or you can be promoted as well. You can be eligible to be promoted as a senior staff, or you can go to interviews for a band 6 position. And sometimes it doesn't matter how long have you been a nurse. You can just go to the interview, apply for it, just be ready to be rejected just in case. So you don't expect so much. It's just good to go to interviews anyway and just know how it goes with the interview, something like that. So yeah, go for it, girl. That's it, Panset. And yeah, so that concludes our episode. And I hope you learned something. I'm just enjoying doing this podcast. Like, I don't get any listeners or no followers at all, no subscribers, but I'm just gonna post everything, anything that I want to say. I still hope you subscribe to my podcast channel, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!